morning, everybody, and welcome to today's meeting of the Corporate Governance Committee. As usual, this meeting is being broadcast live to the public. For those not able to watch live, the webcast will be recorded and made available for viewing on the County Council's website after the meeting. We will move to item 1, which is the minutes of the meeting held on the 19th of September 2025. I propose that the minutes of the meeting held on 19th September are taken as read, confirmed and signed. Is that agreed? Cheers, thank you very much. Item 2 is question time. I have received no question from members of the public. Item 3 is questions asked by members under Standing Order 7.3 and 7.5. I have received no questions. Item 4 is urgent items, and there is no urgent items on this agenda. So I will move to item 5, which is declarations of interest in respect of items on the agenda. Do members present have any declarations to make? Mr. Grimes.
Declaration under item 11. I am an independent person under the current standards regime.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Grimes. Any other members? If not, thank you very much. We will move on to item 6, which is presentation of petitions under Standing Order 35, and no petitions have been received. We will now move on to item 7, which is our first substantive item, which is external auditors annual report and external audit of the 2025 25 statement of accounts, annual governance statement and pension funds accounts. With us, we have Simone Hines, Assistant Director of Corporate Resources, who will introduce this item. A supplementary report has been circulated too. We are also joined by Mary Wren, Grant Patson and Helen Lillington, apologies Helen, from Grant Thornton, our external auditors at the Council, and welcome and thank you for joining us this morning. Simone, over to yourself. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just introduce the item briefly and then I'm going to hand over to Helen and Grant and Mary to go through their reports in a bit more detail. So and I guess apologies in advance for the amount of paperwork that you have for these items, but I appreciate you do have a lot of complex reading that you've had to do. So the item presents the Council's audited statement of accounts for 24-25, so that is the last financial year, for approval by the committee alongside various external auditors' reports, and that really is to present their findings from the audit over the last few months. And Grant Thornton, as the Council's external auditor, are required to report back to the committee and the Council on the work that they've done over the year and to present to you their key findings and any recommendations, which is what they're here for today. So you have got within the agenda pack, you've got the 24-25 accounts themselves and post-audit, although there are still some minor areas still under review by Grant Thornton, which is why they're still sort of draft accounts. Letters of representation for approval as well, and then you've got the auditor's value for money report and the audit findings report as well. And as I've just mentioned, the external audit of these statements is largely complete or substantially complete, and the auditors do anticipate providing an unmodified opinion, but you'll hear more from Helen on that shortly. There are some minor adjustments to be made, but nothing material at this point, which I think, given the length and the complexity of the accounts, is quite an achievement actually, and hopefully you'll hear more about that from Grant Thornton. There are some minor areas of review still outstanding, as I've mentioned. So the report is asking for delegated authority to officers in conjunction with the chair, just to make any further minor changes to the accounts rather than having to bring them back to the committee again. If there is anything that goes beyond minor, we're not expecting it, but if there is anything, we would then bring that back to the committee. But as things stand, we're not expecting to have to do that. So that's the statement of the accounts and the audit findings report. You've also got the value for money report, which I've mentioned. And just to flag up on that before I hand over to Grant Thornton, there is a key recommendation in the value for money report in relation to the Council's high needs deficit, given the scale of the deficit and the future trajectory. That won't be a surprise, I'm sure, to the committee, given some of the conversations we've had about that in the past, but I think it is the first time that the Council has had a key recommendation as part of the value for money report. But I don't think we'll be alone there. I think there'll be lots of other authorities that will be in a similar position because of the kind of national issues with SEN, but I do just want to draw your attention to that. That's all I was going to add, but I will just now hand over to Helen, is it first, to go through their reports. Thank you.
Thanks, Simone, and good morning, everybody. So I appreciate there's a lot of paperwork, as Simone has said, on the agenda, and you've got 3 reports from us today. I am going to take you through the auditor's annual report, which is the work of our VFM. So I will take you through that first, noting that it does make reference to the financial statements audit for both the County Council and the pension fund, but those are actually covered in separate audit findings reports, so I'm not going to actually highlight that as I go through the AAR. It's worth mentioning that the AAR itself it says interim on it. That is to allow for us to purely update the outcome of the financial statements audit and finalise the report. So just to manage expectations, I know it says interim, but the only changes to that will be to allow for the financial statement audit date and the date of the opinion to go in. So you're seeing this auditor's annual report significantly earlier than you would have seen in previous years. Last year we reported it back in January. The reason for that is there's a change in the Code of Audit Practice, which requires us to report this by the end of November. That will eventually align with the coming forward of the opinion date for the financial statements, which will also be November going forward. So the value for money work focuses particularly on the arrangements in place during 24-25, and the code requires us to look at financial sustainability, governance, and what we call the 3 E's of economy, efficiency, and effectiveness. Within that work, we have various types of recommendations that we can make. The most significant of those would be a statutory recommendation, which you'd be pleased to hear that I've not made any of those. We then have key recommendations, which Simone has alluded to, improvement recommendations, and new this year, we also have a category called insights, and that is something where we've looked at you and compared you to other councils, and we recognise the work that you do already, but we think you can go further to embed sort of more best practice. So we don't actually raise those as a particular recommendation. We raise those as an insight for something to consider. So you will notice in the report that we've made insights around the adult social care financial management, governance in terms of organisational culture, and from the 3 E's perspective, we've also made some comments around performance reporting. You'll notice in the report that we do mention LGR, and I'm conscious that it's a very hot topic at the moment. You will appreciate that we focus very much on the arrangements in place during 24-25. So a lot of the preparations have obviously been ongoing in terms of LGR, probably more recently. So again, we've deliberately only had a very brief overview around LGR, and we'll look at those arrangements more in 25-26. So just in terms of sort of where we've landed effectively. So as Simone said, we've raised a significant weakness this year in relation to financial sustainability, and that is as a result of the DSG deficit. As Simone said, really important to put this in context against the backdrop in the sector. Last year, we raised it as an improvement recommendation. This year, we've taken it up to that key recommendation level to recognise the scale of the deficit. And just to give you a sort of feel for where you sit nationally within our client base, our work is not quite finished across the board, but you are one of 29 councils where we've raised significant weaknesses, and we have actually had a statutory recommendation as well around DSG. So you are not alone in that. It recognises the context that you find yourselves in. Just in terms of some of those numbers, which I reference on page 21, an overspending year of just over 16 million, leading to sort of a cumulative deficit position over 40 million, with that predicted by the end of March, to be sort of 260 million. So the scale of that backlog is significant. And while the statutory override is in place, the in-year overspending is still significant and a real risk to that financial sustainability. So while we recognise that the council has made progress, both around the assessment, backlogs, and managing the demand. Obviously, that pressure continues to grow, and that's why we've felt it necessary to raise it as a key recommendation. Just in terms of governance, no significant weaknesses around governance, but you'll notice that 2 of the prior year improvement recommendations we've carried over, and those were around the 3-year internal audit plan and reporting of contract exemptions. And in relation to the 3 E's, we've raised 1 improvement recommendation just to capture the response around the CQC inspection. Appreciating that this was sort of reported as requires improvement back in September, but from our perspective, that gives us an indication of the arrangements that would have been in place during 24-25, which is why it's appropriate for us to comment on it. But the improvement recommendation is very much about making sure that you put the necessary arrangements in place to deal with that. So, appreciating it's a packed agenda, that gives you a highlight. I'm happy to pause there for any questions, Chair.
Oh, sorry. Thank you very much for the detailed report. I think members are conscious that you do a great amount of work for us when you're auditing it, and so henceforth we do get those reports back. Any questions from members regarding anything that's been said so far, or anything on the first initial reports or the key recommendation? No, nothing. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll take you through then. So the next report we're going to take you through is the financial statements audit. As Simona's highlighted, our work is largely complete in this area. Subject to the outstanding work, we anticipate being in a position to sign this before Christmas, which again, it's worth pointing out that this is significantly earlier than we were last year. Last year, we signed just at the beginning of February. So again, making inroads to make sure that you are in the necessary place to be able to continue to not hit that statutory backstop date, which is obviously coming forward year on year now. So I'm going to ask Mary to take you through the detail of the audit findings report.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Chair. Just to clarify, this report relates to the audit findings of the Council's financial statements only. There is a separate audit findings report on the agenda which relates to the pension fund financial statements, and that will be presented by Grant Patterson after this report. I will pause for questions at the end of this. So as Helen said, our work's substantially complete and we do plan to issue an unmodified opinion. Just as this report was written almost 2 weeks ago, I will take you through a brief update since the 14th of November, as well as touch on some of the key areas, such as our work in significant risk areas, and obviously our findings to date. As you'll see from the reporting pack, in the supplementary pack on page 219, there is what I refer to as a traffic light page in terms of the information outstanding. So the fieldwork for the amber and green items is now substantially complete, and over the next week it's subject to final review by myself and Helen. In relation to the first red item, which related to outstanding evidence for land and buildings valuation queries, we have received all responses now from the council on those queried items. Following that, we have received, the council has provided a revised valuation for one of its assets, and we're currently working through that at the moment. The second red item relates to an adjustment in the financial statements regarding nil net book value assets, which have been written off by the council. This has progressed as well, but we do await some final sample evidence from the council. Look to draw that to a close over the next week. I will just briefly touch on the materiality. At the start of the audit process, a level of materiality is set for the council. This is set for all organisations, and effectively this means that if an error is identified above this level, whether individually or cumulatively, it could affect the decisions of someone relying on financial statements. If an error is material, it means it could affect their decision making process. So on page 226 of the supplementary pack, This just sets out the levels of materiality that we've set in terms of the audit, and this hasn't changed throughout the audit. We do revisit that. So the level set for the council is £20 million. We do test to a lower level of materiality called performance materiality, and this is £14 million. There is an area we do which is much lower due to its sensitivity. We do set a lower level at £28,000 for senior officers' remuneration, as this is often considered to be quite a sensitive disclosure. We do report items to committee at a much lower levels. This is called triviality. So any errors, whether they have been adjusted in the financial statements or not, are reported to this committee, and that level is £1 million. So what I will do is just take you through the significant risk areas of the audit, and these are areas which do draw a high level of audit input and also a high level of input from council officers. These often involve the use of management experts. A number of key assumptions are usually highly material values within the financial statements as well. So for the council, these significant risks relate to the valuation of land and buildings and the valuation of the pension fund liability. There is one significant risk which, under accounting auditing standards, all auditors are required to consider, and this is the risk of management override of controls, and that will appear in every audit and will have to be considered by all auditors, and this is primarily covered by our work on the council's journals and that control environment. In terms of those significant risks, these are featured from page 229 of your pack. In relation to management override of controls, we've not identified any issues in our work, and it's now subject to final review. We have raised 3 recommendations as part of our work, and 1 recommendation remains open from the prior year regarding journals under £20,000, which do not require authorisation. There are compensating controls in place, but it is a recommendation that remains open. For land and buildings, on page 200 from page 232 your pack, as previously mentioned, this work is substantially complete. We do need to review the updated valuation provided by the council's valuer last week, and we have raised a recommendation regarding the council's valuation instructions. This is a low level recommendation. And for the pension net pension liability, the work is now subject to final review. We have identified 1 misstatement which has not been adjusted by management and is an estimated understatement of the net pension liability of £1.6 million. This is a point that's been reported in previous years and is quite common across the sector. It relates to a timing difference in effect in relation to the information received by fund managers when the pension fund financial statements are prepared, and it will feature in part of the reporting that Grant will run through as well. Details of all of our audit adjustments are from page 248. The key unadjusted item I've just touched on in relation to the pension fund, and our key recommendations are from page 253. Just to note that management have provided a response to all recommendations made, and we will follow those up as part of our audit planning work in 25-26, and again as we come to conclude the 25-26 audit. Page 262 is our work on value for money, which I'm not going to go through that, as Helen's touched on that as part of the auditor's annual report. And from page 264, this sets out independence, threats and fees for the audit, as well as other work we carry out in terms of the council's audit, which is 1 grant claim for Department for Transport claim. I wasn't going to go into any more detail. I appreciate the report is quite lengthy, and I'm happy to take any questions on the content.
Thank you very much, Mary. Members, any questions at all on this part of the... No questions. Thank you very much.
Okay. Sorry, thank you, Chair. Okay, thank you, Chair. My name's Grant Patterson. I'm, in similar way to Helen, I'm the engagement lead for the pension fund. And as you'll probably know, within the statement of accounts you've got in front of you today, on from page 149, there's a separate set of, in a way, pension fund financial statements. Just to inform members, they also form part of the pension fund annual report that goes through the pension funds committee. But the financial statements within the council's accounts and within the pension fund annual report should be exactly the same. So our work covers both. Reporting to you today, as Mary has said, in your role of those charter of governance and approving the accounts for publication. And firstly, what I'd like to do is thank both Judith Halliday and Jason Firth from the Pensions Fund team. The audit has gone relatively well this year, and as Helen said, I think we've certainly been a good place to bring the audit forward, I think, in future years as well, and hit those earlier deadlines. We normally start the pension fund audit a little bit earlier because we normally have to provide assurances to other auditors around pension liabilities. In similar way to as what Simone said earlier, the headline message for yourselves as those charter of governance is that our work is substantially complete. I think there's one element of where we have some valuations from LGBS Central that we need to go through. But as a result of that, our anticipated opinion on both the financial statements within the council's accounts and within the pension fund annual report will be unqualified. So that is our proposal. In terms of probably the details for you as those charter of governance, we did come back with a progress report in September saying that we had made one change to our audit plan that we brought to you back in June. In terms of directly held property, due to the value of that, we'd initially, because of the work of directly held property, we normally consider it to be a significant risk because it's hard to value. There's lots of assumptions in there. But when the draft accounts came in, it was below our materiality headline. So we decided, well, there couldn't be a significant risk of it being materially misstated. So we've dropped that to be a sort of material only approach to the audit. We still carried out work on it, and there were no issues highlighted at this point in time. The graph on page 291 of your pack actually shows an overview of all of those risks. So as Mary had said, the two significant risks for pension fund, the first one was management override of control. We cannot rebut that in any way. And then the other one would be around the valuation of level 3 investments. And they're level 3 in the grounds of they are hard to value. There's again lots of assumptions, lots of judgments goes within that from the US managers. Therefore, we have to take additional audit assurances and a different approach to get our assurances that we need. We did rebut the risk of fraud in revenue, expenditure, and income as part of planning and as part of our overall work. There's no indications that was incorrect. The full details of how we've audited those significant risks are on pages 293 and 294 of your pack. Just in terms of materiality, on receipt of the draft financial statements, we did review materiality for both the headline account and the fund account. We determined not to change our materialities for the headline, which is 91.8 million, and the fund account, which is your income and expenditure account of 27 million. So we've maintained those materialities. Because of the values going up, it does mean that actually the benchmarks we use have gone down. So it's gone from 1.44% to 1.37%, and down from 10% to 8.6%. In terms of that, they're still within our ranges. So there's no changes overall in terms of our audit approach. In terms of the key findings, as you'll note, in the report, there's a £5.95 million unadjusted difference in the valuation of the pension fund investments disclosed in the financial statements. And that's basically, you have to estimate those figures at the end of the year. We as auditors have the benefit of hindsight that there'll be investment manager capital statements come in later than you see them. And when we compare the actual statements to the estimate, there's a difference of nearly £6 million. I'd say that's well below our materiality of just over 90 million. And we recognise that's primarily driven by those differences, and it's not an indication of any weaknesses in your controls or arrangements as a council. It's just one of those things that we expect to see as pension fund auditors. There is also a sort of rolling unadjusted difference that relates to last year, where effectively overstated income last year by 4 million, which when you enroll it forward, it means it's understated by investment income of this year. It doesn't make any difference to the value of assets though, because it effectively nets off in the year. So, but it is just, we are reporting it for clarity and transparency. So cumulatively, we're satisfied that those differences don't impact upon decision makers or users of the accounts. And as a result of I'm talking through to management, they've decided that they are not considered material both quantitatively and qualitatively, and they're proposing not to amend the financial statements. That then gets reflected in the letter of rep that's in your pack in Appendix F on pages 331 to 334. So we are asking you as the audit committee or corporate governance committee to those charter of governance to approve that letter for signing closer to the opinion date. We also did identify some classification differences in note 8 around benefits. There was a £4.1 million presentation adjustment required. There's also in note 20B some reconciliation of the assets at level 3 hadn't been disclosed, or the prior year comparatives hadn't been included. And then in note 25 on your contractual commitments and in contingent liabilities, you have added an additional note. There's a court case which relates to Virgin Media, which is around approval of changes to the rules. It's not totally clear it applies to LGPS, and the risk is reducing because the government is putting legislation in place to make it retrospective or to allow retrospective approval if needed. But on that basis, we have asked for a disclosure, though, that it might, but you're not doing any work to assess the liability and until the clarity around that. So again, picking up on one of Helen's points earlier, that's consistent with all of our client bases. We've asked for that disclosure, but we do recognise that risk is reducing. And then looking at the recommendations we have made in the prior year, the one in respect of cash flows and clearing suspense accounts, we're satisfied that you've addressed that. The second one was around us being able to obtain service audit reports. We're still struggling to get one or two of those from places, investment managers like the Cell. We therefore put that as partially addressed. And then the final recommendation is you have a process of self-approving low-level journals. So there's no check and balance on that. The overall total of those is very low, and I recognise that. However, as auditors, we still believe that authorisation of journals is a key control. It's a risk you're willing to tolerate, so we're reporting about that. So, but we'll continue to recommend that if possible, you bring that in. And then finally, the bits at the end of the report around confirm our independence, and our fees are shown on pages 319 of your pack. Currently not proposing to make any change on the planned stated fees. We have been requested to undertake one IAS 19 additional assurance from a non-NAO audited body, and the standard fee for that is £1,100. So that's a slight addition to the fee. And in terms of the work being completed, as I say, LGPS Central audited accounts have been received. Looking at other clients where I've undertaken that work, no particular issues, so not anticipating any problems. One thing probably to note is as the council audit is likely to be signed in sort of mid-December, you still have to publish the pension fund annual report by the 1st of December. So we just have to put a reason in that. The reason for that is we haven't finalised the audit yet. So, and nothing to do with that. So that's through our audit finance report. Happy to take any questions.
Cheers. Thank you very much, Grant. Members, any questions on that presentation at all? If not, thank you very much. Some very, very good detailed reports there, and I think members were happy with what was presented. Simone, thank you very much for your presentation as well. We were asked to note the report, so I'm happy to move the recommendation. Do I have a seconder? Cheers, thank you very much. Is that agreed? Thank you, that's unanimous. Thank you very much, everybody, for that item. We will now move on to item 8, which is the quarterly Treasury Management Report. And I've got Jason Firth, Head of Finance, to assist and present the report. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Chair. So this is back to the main committee pack and started on page 9 of the main pack. So this is the quarterly Treasury Management Report for the quarter ending September 25. So paragraphs 2 to 4, they set out the committee's responsibilities, and the committee is delegated the responsibility to ensure that the arrangements are appropriate and regularly monitored and are consistent with the annual Treasury Management Strategy and Investment Strategy approved by the County Council in February. Going through the report at paragraphs 5 to 7, these define the Treasury Management and outlines the processes for ensuring funds are managed in line with the strategy and that it operates within the framework of CIPFA's Treasury Management Code of Practice. It's important to note that capital investments, including those managed through the Investing in Leicestershire programme, are covered by the capital strategy rather than the Treasury Management Strategy and are monitored through regular reports to the Scrutiny Commission and the Cabinet. Moving on to the economic background. So every quarter, an economic update is provided by our Treasury Management Advisors. That's MUFG Pension and Market Services. Previously, they were called Link Asset Services. And the key points from their last update are outlined in paragraphs 8 to 11, with paragraphs 12 and 13 noting what has happened since the last update. Of particular note is the fact that inflation remains higher than the Bank of England's 2% target. And as a result, following the further cut in base rate to 4% in August, it's now unlikely that there will be further cuts to base rate in this calendar year. Moving on to paragraphs 14 to 18, these summarise the position on private debt and bank risk share funds. These two asset classes act as diversifiers for the Investing in Leicestershire programme, and these help ensure a balanced portfolio. However, they are treasury management investments rather than capital investments, and as such, they are covered in this treasury management update. So, private debt funds just help inform the committee of where money is loaned to companies not originating through banks. And bank risk sharing is a mechanism that allows banks to transfer risk, some of their existing loans, to a third party, permitting them to then release capital to support other activities. Both are done through private funds rather than directly with counterparties. The table in paragraph 14 lists the funds the council has investments in. Moving on to paragraph 19, this shows the position on the short-term investments, so those up to 12 months duration. During the period, the total amount invested increased slightly from 395 million to 396 million. 145 million of the loans matured, with rollover, new loans of 146 being placed at an average annual percentage rate of 4.13%, fall from the previous quarter of 4.29%, and that reflects the trajectory of interest rates reducing. The weighted average has increased from 149 days to 165, reflecting a shift towards more 12-month loans compared to 6-month loans. The table in paragraph 23 shows the breakdown of the investments held at the end of the quarter. So 396 million in short-term loans and 30 million in private debt and bank risk sharing investments. Further information on the breakdown of the short-term investments by sovereignty and institutional credit rating is shown in the diagrams in paragraph 24. And the majority of the investments sit within the top 2 credit rating classes. Paragraph 26, that shows the average APR for the whole portfolio. It shows it has decreased from 4.43% to 4.3% during the quarter, and that's driven by rates, the base rates available on new loans being lower than those that were in place for maturing loans. Paragraph 27 is just confirmation that if any loans retrospectively breached our counterparty limits after a loan is placed due to a downgrading of a credit rating, for instance, the committee is notified. However, as stated in paragraph 27, there were no such breaches during the last quarter. Paragraphs 28 to 33 cover the early repayment of external debt during the last quarter. So following elevated gilt yields at some historic highs caused by inflation remaining above the Bank of England's 2% rate, and the expectation of tax rises in the autumn statement, there had been an increase in the discounts available for the premature repayment of PWLB debt. So after review and consultation with the Council's Treasury Management Advisors, we agreed to repay £29 million of external PWB debt during that quarter, incurring a premium of 8.5 million. Taken together, the net projected saving by repaying these loans early is approximately 0.5 million per annum for the next 30 years, so that the remaining life of the loans that we've repaid. And as a result, the council's external debt now stands at 146 million the lowest it has been for well over 20 years. And finally, paragraph 35, that advises that interest on short-term investments for 25-26 is expected to be around 16 million for the year. And that is 4 million more than what we budgeted for due to market expectations that rates will stay higher than forecast when the budget was set. And that was everything. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Jason. There is a silver lining to us as an authority with interest rates being higher for longer than we thought, and that's reflected there. But obviously, sometimes when we have to borrow the money, it does dovetail the other way. However, members, any questions on the Treasury Management Report? Mr. Piper.
Sorry, it's maybe a very small point. On page 13, item 24, where you've got your exposure by country, next to the UK, you've got a column there which says MMF. Could you just tell me what that is, please?
Oh, yeah. Sorry, money market funds.
Cheers. Thank you very much, Mr. Piper. Any further questions? If not, we are asked to note the report. I am happy to move the recommendation. Do I have a seconder, please? Mr. Piper, thank you. Are we in agreement? Cheers. Thank you very much, everyone. Cheers. Thank you very much, Jason, for that one. Item 9 is Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman's Performance Annual Report 2024-25. With us, we have Alicia Lanham. Alicia, if you'd like to join us, thank you. Head of Business Services, who will present this item. Alicia, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. So I'm pleased to present the summary of the Council's performance in relation to findings from the Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman for the period of the 1st of April 24 through to the 31st of March 2025. Obviously, the report presents key data and trends, including volumes, categories, complaints, the decision outcomes, uphold rates, etc. And there's also some benchmarking in there with the other county councils for additional context. I'll provide a brief overview of the insights before taking questions. So the number of complaints and inquiries received by the Ombudsman in respect of Leicestershire did increase from 52 in 2020-21 to 122 in 24-25, with a 17% rise between the two most recent reporting periods. This increasing trend does mirror the national trend for English county councils, and the average for the most recent year does sit at 171 as well. So that's a difference of 49 between the average and ourselves. When this information is then adjusted for Leicestershire's population, the number of complaints received per 100,000 residents sits at 16.4. And this places the council literally mid-table when compared with the other county councils, with Nottinghamshire having the lowest rate of 11.1 and then Devon with the highest at 29. The majority of complaints the Ombudsman received continue to relate to education and children's services, followed by adult social care and then highways and transport. And then a breakdown is provided within the report for further information. But not all contexts represent failings, and helpfully the Ombudsman does have distinction within its decision categories to give that more nuanced view of their demand. There are 122 cases decided in 24-25, which is a 28% increase from the year before, where it's sat at 95. So the Ombudsman will decide which cases are not for them or not ready for them, those that can be closed at assessment, and then they'll decide those that warrant a more detailed investigation. 36 cases were referred back for local resolution compared to 26 in the previous year, which means those cases were premature and hadn't exhausted our local complaints procedures, so they were sent back for that to be completed. 40 of those 122 cases were investigated, so that's 33%. and this compares to 37% in the previous year, so a greater share were found not to require full investigation. Obviously, the key decision category is upheld, and this is where the Ombudsman has found fault, evidence of fault, and that does include cases where they have identified that the council has already offered a suitable remedy early on. The rate at which cases were upheld have shown a positive trend over the past 5 years, remaining lower than the average in 4 of those years. And despite the higher number of complaints decided in 24-25, which was 122, the uphold rate has stayed at 83, which is what it was in the year before as well. So that's positive. When adjusted for Leicester's population in 24-25, this rate is 4.5 upheld complaints per 100,000 residents, which compares to an average of 5.3. And again, this metric, so this 4.5 metric, again positions Leicestershire firmly in the middle of that 24-25 distribution. So it reflects that we've got better than average performance and performing better than half of those county councils. But again, there's room for improvement and to learn from those that are performing better than Leicestershire. So you'll see from the report, Nottinghamshire and Lincolnshire are sitting at 1.7, and Gloucestershire, which is immediately to our right, which is 4.4. And the highest reported was Essex, which was 11.9. Complaints manager is in the process of reaching out to local authorities who are showing us having better performance, and we're hoping to understand from them in terms of what they're seeing in their caseloads and what they believe to be driving their metrics, and to help us understand if there's something that we might be able to adopt ourselves in terms of our own practices. 19 of those 40 upheld cases related to education and children's services, with 19 of those then relating to special educational needs. And I think this is to be expected given the council's own complaints profile, and it also is reflective of the Ombudsman's casework nationally as well. And you'll see that reported in their annual report. Council satisfactory remedy rate, and this is where we've resolved the complaints to the Ombudsman's satisfaction before it went there, has improved. So it's risen from 8% in 2020-21 to 30% in the most recent reporting year. So you can see it's sitting well above the average. I think it's 10% in the most recent year, the average. So that's a positive picture. And importantly, the council's maintained 100% compliance rate with the Ombudsman's recommendations for the 5th consecutive year as well. In terms of financial remedies and public reports, so the total value of remedy payments recommended by the Ombudsman has decreased over the 3 years shown, with a 22% reduction between the 2 most recent years, and with those most payments relating to special educational needs and adult social care as well, which again, which is just reflective of the throughput of complaints going into the LGA. In terms of public reports, so the Ombudsman issues reports in cases where they believe there's wider public interest. And I'm pleased to say there was no public reports issued in 2020, 24, 2025, and 3 have been issued in the past 10-year period. And I will pause there for comments if that's okay.
Yes, thank you very much, Alicia, for the comprehensive report there. Members, any questions to note? No question. Just a comment from myself, we're not surprised, I think, with the where the complaints are coming from. I think we and other county council are under pressure in similar areas, as you've mentioned as well. But we aren't asked to feed back anything, but I don't think there is anything, because we're all in the same boat in respect to the complaints. But I just wanted to make this one note, is the amount of transactions that we do with members of our residents and the public, it is a small amount that actually goes through us to complaints and then on to the Ombudsman. So it is a tiny fraction of what does go through. So, but and I will always encourage my residents, if they've not got a remedy for our complaints process, to go to the Ombudsman, because that will be a natural step for us to do. So we won't want to ever curtail that, but we will deal with any response and feedback that they give us. And the report does say that we have 100% compliance on any feedback that comes back. Thank you very much. So we're asked to note the report. Are we happy to, can I have a second there, please, if I move the recommendation? Thank you very much, Mr. Page. All in favour? Cheers, thank you. We will now move to item 10, which is the policy for disclosure and borrowing services, DBS, checks for elected members. With us, we have Lauren Haslam, Director of Law and Governance, who will present the report. Over to yourself.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. This short report, hopefully relatively clear. We have a rolling process, as you might imagine, of reviewing our policies from time to time. When we do that, we look around, see what the best practice is elsewhere. So in reviewing our DBS check for members, we're recommending a slight change in the policy. Currently, the policy provides for enhanced checks on members involved in certain activities set out at paragraph 3 of the report on page 53. So that's essentially those involved in children and adult safeguarding, handling confidential or sensitive information, or those in positions of trust or authority. We're recommending that the policy be extended to enable a basic DBS check on all members. Primarily, that's to ensure that substitution arrangements are managed appropriately, and that suggested amendment has been discussed with all of the group leaders and is supported unanimously. If that is agreed by the committee today, the checks will be undertaken through Graham Wardle's office in the usual way, and obviously they're treated confidentially, will only be shared where that's necessary with group leaders to enable the objective of the exercise, which is to ensure the sort of decision making is properly safeguarded. So the recommendation is that the policy which is attached to the report and is set out on page 57 is approved. Thank you, Chair.
Cheers. Thank you very much, Lauren, for that. Members, I think the report is straightforward, but does anybody have any questions at all or any concerns regarding what Lauren or the paper has reported? If not, thank you very much. As Lauren said, group leaders have discussed this at length, and it's not to catch anybody out or anything. It's just because we're in a different climate now where we probably need to substitute more on committees than we did previously. And it's just to make sure those members are able to substitute on those relevant and appropriate committees as well. So I'm happy to move the recommendations. Do I have a second then, Mr. Bowles? Thank you very much. All in favour? Thank you. Cheers. Thank you very much. That's you. I will now move to item 11, which is the annual report on the operations of the Member Code of Conduct 2024-25. Again, we have Lauren with us who will proceed with this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is the annual report which we bring every year around now, just setting out data on the complaints received, outcomes as far as they can be ascertained, and any trends or other issues to note. So the data is set out on page 60 of the report, and you can see there has been an upturn in complaints over the last 12 months from the previous 2 years that are reported. The focus of that has largely been on social media complaints from members of the public. In light of that, we've organised training for members to try and help understand how to avoid complaints being made, which obviously we hope will lead to a downturn in complaints and from the public. I set out a little bit on page 61 the background to the issues that crop up frequently through those sorts of complaints, just for members' information. In all member conduct complaints, I consult with the independent persons, and the council's fortunate to have a panel of 6 independent persons. Mr. Pilgrim and Mr. Grimes, who are here today, are both on the panel, and I'm grateful to them for their input, advice and assistance in the process, which is invaluable. And I've set out the second part of the report at paragraph 11 onwards at page 62, some changes that we may expect to come down the line. This committee responded to a consultation probably at the beginning of this year, around or the end of last year, beginning of this year, a consultation undertaken by MHCRG on proposed reforms to the standards and conduct regime. The outcome of that is set out at paragraphs 12 of the report, and that is the changes that we may expect to happen. I can't give you any guidance really on when that will take place. The government information just said when parliamentary time allows, which gives obviously maximum flex for them to slot this in whenever it's convenient in the parliamentary timetable. But as you'll see, the regime reforms proposed are a strengthening of the standards regime over that which currently is in operation. So as and when that gets through the parliamentary process, we'll bring further reports to this committee, because obviously it will be key that this committee is involved in any changes to the standards regime that may flow from this. Thank you, Chair.
Cheers. Thank you very much, Lauren, for that. Members, any questions on the report at all, or any? Yes, Ms. Bottom.
Thank you. I'm sure as most people were quite shocked to see the uptick of complaints. And I know that it was mentioned about, freedom of speech, but obviously that's been around forever. That's not a new thing. So it doesn't quite explain the massive uptick there was. I did attend the training. Obviously, I'm a new member. I appreciate there are a lot of new members here and I found it really useful. Is there any thing moving forward, so when we get new members that will become part of our onboarding process, or is there any rolling training that we will get to ensure that these kind of issues aren't coming up again and again, because it feels like it is kind of focused on this one specific issue?
Yes, thank you. It's a good question. I think it's important that we make sure we respond to this sort of issue. So I think we'd always had the social media training planned, and in the induction programme probably it was too late. So I think in future years we'll bring it, make it earlier in the process for members. Yes, and I think it's a good point. We need to keep it refreshed and reviewed, and offer sort of annual updates as and when required, if that would be helpful for members, certainly, because none of us really want to see this level of complaint. I'm sure it's time consuming and stressful for everybody concerned. Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you for that, Lauren. Okay, I'll go to Mr. Bow.
Thank you, Chair. If anyone doesn't know, I'm somewhat of a complaint expert now. I've had about 20, I think. So this whole thing interested me very much. The report on page 60 says complaints jumped from 5 to 34 this year, and the main cause is now councillors' social media and public comments. Well, I think myself and others have noticed that spike started the moment Reform UK councillors were elected. So I wanted to ask the Director of Law and Governance, does she agree that this huge increase is almost entirely vexatious complaints from far-left activists trying to cancel and silence Reform UK councillors for our political views and not for any real breach of the code, as I believe it certainly is that in my cases? Thanks, Chair.
No, I wouldn't agree with that statement. Thank you, Chair.
Cheers. Thank you very much, Lauren, for that. Mr. Wolf?
Good, Dad, I can't. When I say I don't agree with it, it's simply because I don't know. I don't inquire of complainants what their political background is. It's never expressed in those terms. It's they appear to me to be genuine complaints of people expressing upset and having taken offence at comments that have been made. I haven't got any way of knowing the background of those who submit complaints, and nor do I inquire. I don't think that would be appropriate for me to do so.
Thank you very much for that clarification, Lauren. Mr. Wolf.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. And I guess it is on the people who are making the complaints, actually, this question. Obviously, regardless of political allegiance, these people who have complained generally hurt or upset or find offence within the comments, the social media. And I think it's important that we recognise that. And I just wondered how we close the loop. I guess my experience is more in my previous role as a borough councillor, but there's often a gap between a complaint being made and then feeling like justice has been served in some way, whether that's seeing the complaint through or an apology being made. So how do we do that at the county council, and do we have any figures on how or verbatim comments about how the people who have made the complaint do feel after it's been resolved? Thank you.
So the complaint outcome is fed back to complainants. So they're advised at the outset that the process is confidential, and that there's limited information that can be shared with them. And then periodically you get sent updates. You know, it might just be, sorry, I can't update you on the outcome, but we're still working through it. It might be as simple as that. But then at the end, they get a sort of update on what has happened. And I don't do a sort of satisfaction survey, if you like, but very often, you know, complainants do respond to say, well, thank you for looking into it. Either I'm not happy with the outcome, I think you should have done more, or they are happy, but I don't actually sort of gauge, if you like, how they feel about it. I mean, that might be something that we could look at now that we've got a slightly different regime in terms of the numbers of complaints that are coming through.
Just to put that into context, the reason why I said that is because I think the limited powers we have currently to deal with these complaints are quite frustrating, and, you know, they're quite minimal, where I'm pleased to see there's going to be a strengthening of the potential repercussions for these comments or actions or behaviours. And I think that's a real positive step forward, so people are held accountable when they do upset or misinform or anything like that. Thank you.
Yes, I think that's a very good point, because complainants won't have an understanding of the limits really on the member conduct panel process, and I think they do have an understanding or misunderstanding, I suppose, that there is more power than there is. So I think that does sort of build in disappointment, if you like, at the outset, because when panel will never be able to achieve what some complainants want. That may change, obviously, as the new regime comes into force.
The page. Just a couple of things. The first comment would be that I think there are actually a number of people out there who are professional complainants. And I think we will never ever satisfy all of those groups as someone that actually had a complaint against them, not from a professional perspective, but because of something I was engaged in. I do understand that it's easy to get yourself involved in something that actually you think you're doing the right thing, you're saying the right thing, but actually it was possibly misinterpreted. But I would say also that I think that we're out there as local politicians, and we are likely to attract all sorts of opinions that disagree. And I think what we have to just bear in mind is that as disrespectful as some of those people are to us, I think we do have to be careful and hold back on what we say in return. So I think that's a lesson learned. Certainly, we need to observe the conduct requirements that we sign up to. The other point I wanted to make, though, was, is there a training program for cabinet members here? I kind of feel that there is a general standard of conduct for all of our members, but I feel there's an added piece here for the conduct of cabinet members. And if there isn't, can we look at how we might achieve that?
Yes, thank you. I'll feed that back. Thank you.
There's some very good comments there as well. Any further comments or questions at all? If not, I just want to make a comment myself. It's just that we do have a members code of conduct and an officer member relationship code of conduct, and we're all held, regardless of which party, political party we're from, held to that standard. I just ask members just to refresh themselves on that one if they feel that they're falling foul of that. Hopefully this is a settling period after an election, and those numbers will go down for our next report. But if members do feel that they are getting personally got at, let's say, I would always encourage them to speak to our officers, who will give them advice and show them ways that they can properly de-escalate any problems that they have, maybe on social media, and conduct on social media as well. So please do take the resources that the county council has to help as well. But also on another point is that if you have party resources as well, that way as well, because I do understand we are in a politically charged environment at the moment, and will be remiss of us not to recognise that as well. But there are help and resources available. And Mr. Page, very well spoken, I think, on that one regarding our own personal conducts as well, to see if people might bait us, as they say. It's just for us to be professional and see above that. Thank you. I'm happy to move the paper. Can I have a second, please? Cheers, thank you very much. And at this time as well, I just want to thank our independent persons, Mr. Pilgrim and Mr. Grimes, who've contributed as well, not just here, but throughout the year as well. So thank you very much for that as well. Thank you. All in agreement? Thank you very much. Cheers. Right, we will now move to item 12, which is the risk management update. This report will be presented to us by Neil Jones, Head of Internal Audit Services. Before we consider the main report, we are having a presentation from Jenna Walker. Let's join us. Assistant Director of Environment and Transport, and Tim Brown, Assistant Director of Children and... Tim's not here. Okay, I'll leave that bit then. So, Neil, over to yourself and then over to Jana while she's...
I'm just going to pass straight to Jana, please, Chair.
Apologies, Chair. I think I've just got to join you on Teams and share my presentation. If
no problem. Take your time. Thanks.
Let's do it this way. Coming through to you. There we are. That's the scariest bit of all, isn't it? Trying to share on Teams. So thank you very much for having me this morning, Chair. My name's Jana Walker. As you said, I'm Assistant Director for Highways and Transport at Leicestershire County Council on the development and growth side, and also presenting to you today because I've recently taken over responsibility for the growth service as well. So we're looking at this area. So the presentation I'm giving you, not sure if you're familiar with the background, is about our approach to managing the impact of growth in Leicestershire generally. So you will probably be on committees, or your local constituents will be aware of growth in their area. They'll be wondering what the County Council does to manage and mitigate that growth, and I'll be talking to you a little bit about that today, but really in the context of our corporate risk register. So I'll try not to take too much of your time, and somebody I get very interested in this area, so if anybody needs to move me on, please feel free to do so. But the risk that I'll be talking to you about today, I've put up there. I won't read it out word for word, but effectively is that capturing that risk where growth is either not sort of properly planned, it's speculative growth, or that growth comes forward without the appropriate mechanisms for funding the necessary infrastructure to support it. So we'd immediately think of things like education facilities, the highways and transport network, waste facilities, community assets like libraries might not come along with that development. So that obviously can lead to unsustainable development happening and harm existing communities. But where our statutory duties of the County Council are involved as well, it can leave a kind of financial gap and a burden on the County Council to try and fill that gap, hence why that is appearing on our corporate risk register. So just to give you a bit of background as to why that sort of challenge occurs, I think planning is a really complicated picture at the moment. You'll probably be aware there's a national drive for housing delivery. So really numbers are king here, you know, what numbers are being delivered and how they, that I'd say slightly less questions being asked about how that's personal opinion, but how they're being delivered. And what we are seeing is that quick delivery usually means smaller sites coming forward because they're less complicated to deliver, but they don't necessarily come with either enough sort of weight of themselves to deliver infrastructure, or they don't really require, you know, if you have to say have 100 house development, don't necessarily need to provide a school, but they obviously need school places. And so you've got this kind of cumulative impact of development coming up, and I will talk to you a little bit about that as well. You've also got changes in planning policy. Some of you may be sort of representing areas where the district and the councillors, the planning authority, is under pressure to bring their local plan forward under the current regime, largely because that has a sort of lower level of housing allocation associated with it under the new methodology. So there is a kind of I guess I'm from Highways and Transport, a traffic jam of local plans at the moment, trying to get through ahead of planning changes, and that's a difficult situation for colleagues in the planning authorities to manage, and is a lot of work in a short space of time. And then I think you've got essentially a development industry that's telling us that there's basically not enough money in development to do all of the things that we need to do to make development sustainable and to unlock growth effectively. And so all of that is coming together at a sort of national level to influence our local situation. So here in Leicestershire, we do have overlapping local plan timetables. So actually for officers at the county council as well, that means trying to develop good evidence bases across a number of areas at the same time, be present in the meetings where these things are being discussed, try and influence that situation. So there's a resource pressure there as well. I think it's fair to say that the evidence base, particularly maybe for education and for highways and transport, they're complex. You need to understand what the plan is, you need to understand what the impacts of that growth could be. But then the important stage is to think, are you happy with those impacts? Is that what we're aiming for? And really we should be looking at the potential demands for infrastructure, and then thinking, how do we want to influence that? So rather than just provide for all the car journeys that everybody might want to do, rather than just sort of allow traffic to kind of spill out on less appropriate roads, we should be trying to influence those positions. And that takes time, to make sure that's feasible. And with the timetables, a lot of local planning authorities are facing to develop their local plans. A lot of the plans are coming forward and evidence bases are being developed alongside them at the same time, and that is a complicated situation. There are just significant infrastructure requirements arising from growth at the moment, I would say, and again, sort of from my personal observations, probably because a lot of the quick win growth has been taken up in the last few years, and so you're now on to sites that are a bit more difficult, a bit more expensive to bring forward, require more infrastructure investment. And so that, coupled with the fact that delivering infrastructure costs more at the moment than it did a few years ago, is putting pressure on those services. And across a number of areas in Leicestershire at the moment, we're, the Highway Authority in particular is a review that there could be severe impacts on the highway and transport network arising from growth, both on our network and on National Highways network. And we really need to make sure that we are looking for solutions to that. And I think we've been fairly pragmatic in recognising that in some areas there will be a deterioration in conditions. We won't be able to mitigate everything, but we clearly don't want to prejudice people's safety, their ability to access services in their local area. We don't want to prejudice our ability to develop our economy, being a less attractive place to invest. So all of those things are on our mind as the County Council when we're inputting into these processes. And I should have said, sorry, Chair, that talking to somebody that's doing this all the time now, that some of you may not know that our role as the County Council is we're not responsible for developing the plan or sort of deciding on where houses will go. Ultimately, that will be the planning authority. We do have a role of the statutory consultee, and it's in this role that we're feeding in these concerns and working with the planning authorities very closely. So just to give you some more background into the challenges, I promise I will come on to some solutions and mitigation at some point. But you'll probably, again, just from your own knowledge of Leicestershire, recognise that now we're getting to a stage where the levels of growth we're talking about are relying on improvements to things in the strategic road network, so the M1, the M69, the A5. And that's not within our control. We're reliant on national highways and national government really to invest in those road networks. But I think it would be fairly common sense to say that we're clearly not going to see multi-hundreds of pound million investment coming into all of those junctions in the next plan period. And so we need to be thinking about how we can manage growth in a pragmatic way. Another challenge we've seen, and I think this has arisen because of those changing circumstances. Previously, it perhaps wasn't so much of a challenge for us, so it's something that we need to adapt to. But there are a lack of effective mechanisms set out in local plans to get those contributions in. So you'll be aware that we've been looking at introducing SIL in Leicestershire. There's not previous, there's currently still no adopted SIL, so that's the Community Infrastructure Levy, which in really simple terms kind of works as a kind of, well, it's per square metre type levy on development. You build a development, you contribute a proportion amount into that. We're looking to introduce our first one, working with Charnwood Borough Council, and we hope that, well, we've effectively, said quite clearly to other local planning authorities that we think that's the only way that we're going to be able to secure contributions going forward, where you've got smaller developments building into a cumulative impact. And so we're looking to improve that. There's other things affecting the viability and the infrastructure needs of sites. So we've talked about, you probably heard about biodiversity net gain, for instance. And as the sort of additional requirements go on to developments, basically the developers are telling us they can't afford everything that everybody wants from them. You'll be aware as well, possibly, that recently the County Council's had to prioritise education funding as part of local plan development and accept gaps in other funding, such as transport, waste and libraries. That's been a conscious decision to do that. And I think, again, I'm supportive of that decision where we've had to do that. I think what we've got to be careful of, though, is we don't accept that as a baseline position without the evidence and without doing that. So we do look to do as much as we can and only prioritise and make compromises where that's necessary, according to evidence. And I think at the moment, although you'll be aware as well, we've had some local transport grant funding in, for instance, for highways and transport. You've got education, waste pressures, other community pressures. There are not a huge amount of funding available at a national level to plug these gaps. So we're going to have to kind of find our immediate solutions locally. And then just to carry on, this is the last page I've got a challenge, as I promised, Chair, is just that you're then seeing that kind of influence really local planning decisions, so on determination of planning applications. So in Leicestershire, there is a number of areas that are currently without a 5-year housing supply. So what that means is that authority is under pressure to bring development forward and keep a supply of housing going. And where you don't have a 5-year land supply, it sort of tilts a balance in favour of proposed sustainable development. And what we're seeing is areas of speculative development come forward where we don't have a strategy for dealing with that impact. Perhaps it's harder to then pull contributions together to make improvements to the highway or to provide education contributions. And in the case of education, perhaps speculative development as well comes forward where the schools cannot expand or it's difficult to do that. So it's difficult to respond to that reactively. We're also seeing increased sort of incidences of developers or promoters raising viability issues with us through the development management stage. They've got a local plan allocation coming to determine the application, and then there's an issue around viability, and we're having to do that prioritisation exercise I spoke about at the plan level as well. We generally prioritise an education contribution so that we can make sure we meet our statutory duty to provide school places, but therefore other services are receiving less funding. And whilst you might not see that immediate impact, because we tend to get contributions in a few years, after the applications have come through, it will start to affect our ability to provide some of those services, and in some cases in the shorter term as well. So as all of these things have come together to increase the risk, I think, for the County Council, we are working to manage that risk, and we're bringing together departments to work more closely together. So, for instance, in the past, it perhaps wasn't so necessary because schools could plan schools, highways and transport were over here, plan the highways and transport, and waste were doing their thing, and the money was all coming in, everyone was fine. Now we're having to choose between, those services, prioritise them, perhaps think about what gets delivered first and after, because it's not that straightforward. We're bringing those, we're working more closely and developing a coordinated risk management strategy. That'll be something me and my team will be working on over the next few months. And if you're interested, Chair, happy to come back and update you on that. So we're doing that internally. We're building on our local plan responses, trying to provide proactive solutions that are pragmatic, and be very clear about where our red lines are. So having no funding mechanism, for instance, would be a very clear line for the County Council. really working hard on trying to engage with people like Homes England, National Highways to help us develop a framework for delivering sustainable infrastructure or sustainable growth supported by infrastructure. And I'm pleased to say we've had some positive meetings actually with National Highways about that recently. We've really got to make effective use of our policies to support and manage this risk. So you'll be aware there's a planning obligations policy or you may be aware being developed. And also we've recently launched our Enabling Travel Choices strategy, where we're focusing on our relationship with the development industry and how we might maximise those contributions. Obviously I've mentioned CIL, Community Infrastructure Levy, is a priority. And I think what we really want to do is be transparent and pragmatic in our approach to dealing with some of these risks, so that communities understand the decisions we're making. If there are compromises to be made, that we bring them through members, through cabinet, and they are transparent and known. So that's sort of our short-term plan. In the medium to longer-term plan, there's something called a spatial development strategy. Sorry, I've gone straight into the acronym there on the slide, like a typical highways and transport person. Apologies. And what that'll do is place a duty on either the strategic authority, or in our case, the upper tier authority or the unitary authority, to develop a spatial development strategy for the whole geographical area. So rather be constrained by district boundaries for local plans, we can do them on growth areas. And I think for me, that makes a lot more sense in terms of focusing that cost infrastructure viability challenges we're facing, and we'll be able to manage those more effectively. And we'll also be able to liaise on a regional level as well. If those of you who've got patches with bordering the edge of other authorities, you'll know that it doesn't just stop, does it, because you've reached the Leicestershire boundary. You need to be working together, and we'll be able to do that. And again, we're working to take advice on that from experts at the Planning Advisory Service and MHCLG as well. So there are some quite chunky actions for us there, Chair, in order to mitigate this risk, and work closely, and mentioned Tim earlier, with my colleagues as well across the authority to manage those. So apologies for taking up so much of your time, but hopefully that just puts into context what we're going to be doing.
Jenna, thank you very much for that one. Before I go back to Neil, any questions on the presentation? I've got Mr. Page, then Mr. Bulls.
Jenna, thank you very much for that. Just a couple of things from my perspective. You talked about where you have areas, and I'm thinking specifically about Market Harborough here and Harborough's district plan. We don't have one, and it's unlikely we're going to have one in the near future. And the fact that we're getting a deluge of speculative applications, 85 homes here, 85 homes there. Before you know where you are, you get to 1,000 homes, and that's a population increase of 2,500, 1,400 more cars. You need 2 more doctors per it has a significant impact. And I'm interested in the fact you've identified risk. Risk is something that hasn't happened. This is happening. And I think this is a point for Neil later on as well. Our whole approach to risk management, I think, needs to be looked at, because I think actually the county is already incurring these risks. So they are actually issues, and somehow or other we've got to deal with it. And one of those things is, as the statutory consultee, I want to see a more robust statement from, for example, Highways, when they're asked to consider something. Now, the problem we've got is you can only consider what's in front of you. But if you're being asked to consider 10 applications of 85 homes in an area like Harborough, there's a problem. Because you know as well as I do that the infrastructure on roads is not there. It's not there, and it's not sustainable. The other thing I'd like to say is that tilted balance is absolutely the case when you don't have a plan, but actually it's not the be all and end all. And actually the previous local plan still has currency. And I think the problem we've got is that local authorities are too frightened of incurring, the planning inspectorate coming. There are some developers that we're facing in Harborough where they are litigious. They are actually not developers, they're actually lawyers who happen to run development companies, and they're more than happy to take us to the tribunals. I want to see LCC then trying to join up, if you like, with local authorities to prevent this, I think, insidious kind of approach to development, and to use all the words that you can use to make it more difficult and to actually challenge those developers, because I'm concerned about the legacy of what's going to happen when we actually have these things being forced through. And a lot of it is in territory on land that actually shouldn't be built on. It's floodplains in my particular area. And so we feel kind of like a little bit bereft here that as I said, you're a statutory consultee, yet it seems like everything goes through on the basis that county said it was okay. And it's evidently not okay. And you don't get the opportunity to say you reject this plan, but you do get the opportunity to tighten your words. So in summary, what I'd like to say is I'd like to see county taking a stronger review, not just a desktop exercise, because again, I've seen some applications come through where the developer has actually said, well, this has been approved by county. And when we find out that county hasn't actually had a look at what the development looks like, they've looked at it on a map, the actual reality of the proposal itself is very different. When you look at the flows of traffic and you look at the situation of what's actually being presented, if you'd been there, you'd had a look, you'd take a different view. So I'm interested in your views on that and how you can actually help us all in the districts.
Jenna, this is not a planning meeting or a thingy, so it's just about the risk of that. If you can curtail it to that, Mr. Page, I don't want to be thinking, but we're just not here as the planning authority, so I can understand wholeheartedly of what you're saying. It's just the risk element of it, and of it. That's fine.
Yeah, so in terms of the risk of that sort of impact of speculative development or growth going in the wrong, I'll use wrong places for as an easy term. I think you'll see. In our response to Harborough's consultation on the local plan, for instance, you mentioned Harborough, we did take quite a firm stance there to say that you believe the impacts of that to be severe and they haven't been addressed, and therefore we'd have concerns about the plan. And that's the kind of clear approach that we do want to build on, I think, and offer, again, perhaps even more clarity around what the options are going forward in those situations. I think I'd be interested to get your examples of where we've not been out on site if there's a severe impact, because we do undertake site visits, so I'd probably pick that up separately. But I think the other thing we're trying to do, although it doesn't always work perfectly, you're probably familiar with, say, for instance, there's been speculative growth in an area around the A6 of Kibworth. There's been some interest in that lately. We did proactively identify that growth was coming forward, seek to address its cumulative impact, but it has taken a number of years then to get the 106 money in to mitigate that growth. So we do try and be proactive. I think our best option at mitigating the risk, and I do agree with you, are issues as well, but I think the risk that we're highlighting here is that is exponentially growing to the point where the financial burden on the council could be higher, and we need to, mitigate that. Is to get in at that plan policy stage, to have as much weight behind our decisions that we can then use at the development management stage, at the space you're talking about, to really have a robust position where that growth is not going to contribute to sustainable growth in the county. So absolutely take on board your comments. I'd be interested in your examples outside of this, if that's okay. Thank you, Chair.
Cheers, Jenna. Thank you very much for that, Mr. Balls.
Yeah, just on that, Mr. Page, thank you so much for raising all those points. I don't know if it can be brought forward to scrutiny in general and have a discussion, because I think I've got about 59 questions after the back of that, and it'd be great to have a discussion about it, because, different borough council, but similar problems, and I think they're everywhere. Mine is around the transition to sills, because I'm part of a neighbourhood planning group and a local planning group, and the move away from 106 for me fundamentally changes the ability for those communities to identify projects that they want to invest in. Something as simple as a playing field, changing to 3G, that's something really important to 106 and the neighbourhood planning committee, or something more significant, thinking about the local plan and 106 contributions, community centres, leisure centres. For me, looking at sills, they remove that local connection to where that investment goes. Look, we're going to have 500 houses, but we can mitigate some of that because of this. And my worry is somewhere like a Desford or Newbold Verdon will take over 1,000 houses, but they won't see any benefit from that. That benefit will maybe go to Ratby or Groby or Markfield, where it has no relationship with the local community. And I just want to know how we mitigate that, because sills, for me, remove that locality of investment and reduce the impact we're going to see locally. Thank you.
Jenna, if you just want to come in on that risk app.
Thank you, Chair. So I think I should first sort of clarify, we recognise here that we're dealing in mitigating risk, but our intention in mitigating that risk is to balance our responsibility as well to help make places. So we want that's the aim of that. And in doing so, there are things that can be done. So for instance, in Charnwood at the moment, the SIL is only going to concentrate on highways and transport for the reasons that the impacts of that are so far spread and it's very difficult to pull 106, but actually other services are being done by 106 because that might be more appropriate. So working with the planning authorities, we've got the opportunity to do that. I think there are also, and not a planning expert, but in areas where you do have neighbourhood plans, for instance, there's almost like it's not a top slice, but a kind of percentage that goes towards those community projects to recognise that you're then generally going to focus on bigger strategic stuff with SIL. And I think the duty on all of us as local authorities is to kind of look at that place, what does it need to function, and make sure that's represented through the plan policies as a whole. We will all, we've talked here, we have been quite firm about prioritising education infrastructure, for instance, but I think, for very good statutory reasons, but the evidence base from that local plan should look at all of those, and we should have the best funding mechanisms really for that particular area. Because otherwise you don't need a local plan, do you? It's just a plan. So I think that's the key and the challenge for all of us as we move forward to do that.
Thank you very much, Jenna. Miss Bottomley.
Thank you. I've just got a couple of questions, if that's okay. So the first one was that I know sometimes when LPAs reject applications and they go higher, funding requirements can be removed. Have we got any kind of way to manage that as a risk, or any kind of working through that? I also noted in the report, it mentions, education, transport, waste, libraries. There's nothing about flood risk, which I found a little bit concerning. And is there any way we can, include that and look at how some of these developments are potentially increasing the flood risk? I know legally you can't have more runoff and all those kind of things, but, in my division, we've got situations where all of the water is going into one waterway, which there is a big argument about whether it can cope or not. I don't think it can. And I think that's something, looking to the future, we really do have to manage flood risk with all the extra houses. And also when it comes to things like highways and flood risk, even if houses aren't flooding internally, if no one can get to work out from a village, that is still a massive impact on their day-to-day lives. And then the final thing was just, could we manage some of this risk better by having, tighter and better working relationships with the other agencies involved, and like the LPAs, things like the ICB. I know if the ICB don't get the reports and things in, you don't get any extra funding for healthcare. So we've got an issue again in my division with this. And it feels like some of this could probably be managed by having much better working relationships and getting everyone around the table rather than it being an email here, an email there. Is any of that workable or doable?
Over to you, Jenna.
Thank you, Chair. So, and just correct me if I miss anything or I've got any of this wrong. So the first point I think was around where we've kind of worked on that evidence base, the contribution requests have gone in, but then they kind of get removed or changed at the last minute. So ultimately, the planning authority can make those decisions. I think the better job we've done of the plan policy and the development management policies, and also understanding viability, the less of those that should happen reactively. So the first thing is try and get the upfront bit right. In reality, if we really felt that was a sort of erroneous decision, there are sort of legal challenges open to us. But I think you'd have to really think carefully about the costs and the benefits involved in doing that. And a lot of these developments that's happening on a smaller, perhaps the cost to the county council of challenging that would be greater than the difference. And so there's sort of pragmatic discussion about that. But that's not to say in the right set of circumstances, we wouldn't seek to challenge it. But the much better option, I think, for all people involved, Leicestershire residents, ourselves, is that we are working together to compromise. So I try and avoid that at all costs. Well, not at all costs, but wherever possible. Flood risk is an interesting one, and sorry, I should have probably alarmed you all by not talking about flood risk. But the main reason it doesn't get mentioned in here is because we tend to deal with that by way of condition. So it doesn't come into developments having to pay us to mitigate their flood risk. They should do that themselves, do the works themselves, submit the plan themselves. So where that will come in, and you probably are seeing this locally as well, is the cost of development includes greater flood risk mitigation, which is then affecting the viability. So we wouldn't want to be really collecting, say, 106 contributions over a longer term for flood risk schemes are the same way, because whilst you might cope with the queue getting a bit longer before you mitigate it, you're not going to want flood to get worse before it gets better. So it's much better dealt with at condition. And your point about getting everybody around the table as an early stage as we see those challenges coming up, I think we're much, as all of our responsible areas, much more aware of those compromises and challenges like have to be made. Whereas I think previously the policy kind of was a little bit rosy, like everything's fine, and it was at the development management end you were struggling. So I think there's a real appetite for us to do more of that, either pulled together by the local planning authorities to have those roundtables as part of their local plan development, or by ourselves, at least internally in our own services as well. So I think you're absolutely right, and more of that is going to need to be done. And I think we're going to have to find better ways of working with the development industry to have sort of a bit more creative ways of providing some of these things, and perhaps different funding structures to that. So I think we should have those strong relationships, really, and I'd agree.
Cheers, thank you very much, Jenna. Mr. Cook.
Thank you, Chair. Now, I'd just like to echo my colleagues' concerns, and I'm sure that every village is experiencing this. I think, if I'm to be blunt, that we're working with them. We have no say in it. Flooding one-way streets through villages, Mines, Counterthorpe, where I sat on the parish council meeting and echoed the concerns, abuse, but there only seems to be supermarkets that are built along these roads without any say. No parking, and you mentioned risk. There's very high risk. No one's been killed yet, but it's only a matter of time, and that seems to be the only way it's going to stop. I don't know where this all ends. As much as you want to sit around the table, we want to sit around the table and talk to these people. At what point do we have any strength? You mentioned there about solicitors and high-powered people. That's news to me, but it's shocking just to the depth it goes to get these houses built. And I don't know what waits. Only on the news this morning, there's new houses being sold now because of floodplain. At what point does somebody sit up and say, well, enough's enough here, you know, we don't need these houses? But that's a question for another day. But at what point do we say in this village, there is very high risk, very big concerns? Do we stop these developers rather than just talking to them and tinkering? And that's why I use the word tinkering around providing for them. It's a real concern. And I thank my colleague here for mentioning these issues. Thank you.
Jenna, briefly. Thank you.
Yeah, apologies, Chair. You won't invite me back at this rate, will we? I think we recognise the concerns. I think some of those challenges are probably for a national policy position that I can't comment on. But in terms of our responsibilities, I think you've absolutely identified, you know, we need to be very clear about the impacts of these developments, robust in the positions where we can make those points. And traditionally, inspectors of local plan examinations or those looking at planning applications do give quite a bit of weight to the county council as a statutory consultee, and so we need to be picking our battles, I think, but really making the point where they can be, and recognising that I think what you're saying reflects a lot of how the community feels as well.
Cheers, thank you very much. Mr. Piper, we'll take you as the last one on this presentation and we'll move on to Neil. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Yeah, this has dragged a bit, but I think some very good points come out of here. One of the points, and I think directly related to Jana, is the traffic aspect of which you are a consultee. One of the things which I'm very aware of is that there are lots and lots of developments all around the area. In fact, I don't know if you remember back in August, the local MP in Lutterworth had a meeting and he actually identified 3 or 4 in quite a small area. The traffic impact of one might be nothing. The traffic impact of another might be nothing, but the cumulative traffic impact of would certainly make a big difference. And this is an extension. Now you're talking about 85 houses in place. I'm talking about, you know, hundreds in here, or you know, the battery cycle plant and a number of different things. Is there a map somewhere around of the county of all of the developments around and the potential impact? And do you look at it that way? And before you answer that, if I may go back to Nicola's point there about getting around the table, fortunately I was able to persuade the council to have the local flood meeting in my village on Friday afternoon, where in fact there was all the people sat around the room, as it were, to talk about the flood implications and try and mitigate the flood. And how do you mitigate the flood on a housing estate which is built on a floodplain and on probably the wettest part of the village? Thank you, Chair.
Ms. Piper. Jenna, over to you.
Okay, so just I'm trying to put it in the context of mitigating the risk that we've been talking about, which is effectively, can we look at the cumulative impact of that development and make sure that we are providing the necessary infrastructure for it, or that it doesn't become a severe impact. So we do that at local plan stage. So where that growth is identified and it comes forward in line with the plan, we can do that, although it can take some time to develop to get all the contributions in to then manage it. It's harder on speculative development because once you're only dealing with a planning application, that development only has to deal with its own impact at the time that its applications are in. So there are times, like the Kidworth example, where if they're coming forward at an early stage and we're aware of that, we can sort of say you need to sensitivity test this with the development across the road. You need to provide a joint master plan, for instance, if that's there. But if those timings don't match, there's nothing in the planning policy that allows us to really kind of judge that development by its wider context. And that's where I'm really keen that we make the most of the local plans, and whether that be highways and transport impact or what you need to see for education or waste, the best time to influence that is at the plan stage. And then if that plan is delivered and the local planning authority can bring forward houses in line with that plan, you can refuse speculative development because they're not in line with your plan. What we've got to do is catch back up, because we're in quite a reactive phase, or I feel as though we're in quite a reactive phase of not quite having that strong plan policy and delivery following it to help us resist speculative development.
Cheers. Thank you very much, Jenna. And I hope members will agree that was a good presentation, and thank you very much for your contributions. Now we'll move back to the main report, and Neil, over to yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so this is a routine update. We do have some information on emerging risk and some countermeasures for fraud. So this particular cycle includes the rewritten long-standing risk on developer contributions, which was just the subject of the earlier presentation, and update on all the other corporate risks on in Appendix A, which is on page 71. I touch on in paragraphs 8 to 13 an emerging risk around AI and how the council is developing its use of artificial intelligence, what risks are associated with that, and the current mitigations. And this area remains a rapidly evolving area with policies constantly under review. Paragraph 14 just briefly references local company reorganisation, but I know members have had much detailed reports on that as well. And then towards the back end of the report, I just talk in paragraphs 15 to 23 in terms of some work we've got in mitigating fraud risk, including our biannual anti-fraud and corruption action plan, which is an appendix. We are actively currently reviewing national fraud initiative matches, and we recently, only last week, completed some work to promote International Fraud Awareness Week. That's all I've got to say on the report, Chair. Take any questions.
Cheers. Thank you very much, Neil. Any questions on the report? I've got Miss Bottomley and then Mr. Grimes.
Thank you. Just a really quick one. So in paragraph 10, it says about before requesting AI, what people need to do. And I was just wondering if there's any way we could add in there that they have to demonstrate, you know, how they're going to check the accuracy of the work and whether it's hallucinating or not. I know it's referenced a little bit in paragraph 12, but I wondered if it needed to be like a real stipulation that if we're using AI, we need to make absolutely sure it's not hallucinating, it's giving us accurate data when they're requesting it, to kind of demonstrate that they're aware of this from the outset.
I think it's a given, but I'll take it back in terms of promoting it, in terms of, you know, making sure it is.
Mr. Grimes.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. In various points here and in various contexts, and it was also mentioned by the auditors around special educational needs and SEND and EHCPs, there's quite a bit of focus on turnaround times and for producing EHCPs. I'm getting a feeling with the work I do with schools and academies that there's not a lot built in around quality. And it's causing quite a bit of difficulty out there, I think, in terms of things that EHCPs that are actually being presented. It does acknowledge here at 7.7 about the capacity of staff, about EdSykes and SEN officers, and also was mentioned elsewhere in the documentation about workarounds for that. And I'm just interested about whether the workarounds, by not using EdSykes, qualified EdSykes, are well, whether you'd be aware or whether just flagging it up is causing difficulties, because this is some of the feedback I'm getting from some of the establishments. Sorry? Oh, well, my general point was that SEND is mentioned in several places and was also mentioned in the auditor's report. What I was just talking about, the latter part, was on page 76, 7.7 in the risk register. If current demand for EHCPs exceeds available capacity of staff within SEN services, particularly EdSykes and SEN officers, it's talking about leaves the council vulnerable to complaints and maladministration. The general point I was making, though, was about things are being captured in terms of turnaround times. We've reduced it from so many weeks, and I think you're down to 24 weeks now, which is still above the statutory limit of, or the limit of 20, but it's been reduced down from about 50, I think, which is very laudable. But it was around the quality side of things in terms of that, and I just wanted a view or a concern about are we pushing stuff downwards to get within those figures, and what sort of outputs are we churning out from it?
I don't have an answer.
Sorry, Neil.
No, it's okay. I think
I didn't expect you would on that.
No, it's to take it back and just ask the question and get a response back.
Yeah. Do you want me to drop you a note more specific on that? Okay.
Cheers. Thank you very much, Neil. I've got Mr. Page.
Neil, thank you. I alluded to what I was going to refer to, which is this determination of risk versus issue. If I look at, for example, the table on page 71, you've got children's social care. If the number and type of high cost social placements, it goes on. This is all happening. So what is the risk we're actually talking about here? Because what I want to know is that we've recognized as an issue, we're dealing with the issue, which is quite different from if we don't deal with the issue, there is a further risk to the council for exposure. So I'm unclear really what these ratings mean in terms of the scores, because actually I think the target risk score is, I'm not sure how meaningful target risk scores actually are. What I'm interested in is what the risk will be when we mitigate, or do we just accept a risk and we manage it? So I'm interested in your views on that. It's a kind of technical point about risk management.
I think the members picked up a really useful point. It's been raised before, in terms of we've perhaps slipped over the line too much into reporting on issues rather than risk. Okay, so I think I picked up on your earlier point about we do need a bigger look in terms of what we're bringing to this committee. The target risk score is thought through by management in terms of where they want it to be, but if it's still high in terms of this register, then it would still be on the register. But you do get risks where they are mitigated down and taken away from this register to be managed in the department. It does happen. It may not have happened in the 3 cycles that, or certainly not in the ones you've alluded to there, but it does happen that the target risk is mitigated down so far that it comes away from this register and just is managed in the department. Yeah.
Chair, could we kind of make a note then that we actually probably need to have some further thought around how risks are presented to this committee in view of that, because I think that's quite important. I do have a supplementary question, which is about something else.
Sorry, we'll finish that point off first. I think Simone wants to come in and then
okay, sorry.
supplementary.
It was just to elaborate, I guess, in terms of the target risk score and why we've still got those that are quite high and still flagging as well. And I think that's because these are areas where they are affected by issues outside of the council's control, like for social care and SEND and some of those wider factors around government funding as well. And I think we're at a point where we've got some mitigations that can reduce the risk, but there will always be a fairly high level of risk around those areas because they are external factors that we can't fully mitigate. That's part of the problem.
So, Chair, in answer to that, then we have to have an understanding that we're going to accept that there are risks, as opposed to try and mitigate them. We can mitigate elements of it, but we institutionally have to accept that there are risks that are out of our control. And I think that's the piece that I want to ask you to identify in future as we move forward, because I think that's quite important. We're putting all the responsibility onto us, when in fact we've got to identify that actually there are some things that we just can't control, but the elements we can are the bits that we need to identify and then risk rate. So that's the bit that I'm kind of interested in. The second part was actually in relation to Ms. Bottomley's point about AI. I'd be very interested for our committee to look at the training plans for the use and accommodation of AI actually in the business of the council. I think just to say that it's a given. I think we all know about the hallucination effects, but I'm very concerned about how we use personal data as well within AI and what that means. What are the limitations on that? So I'd want some assurances further around the treatment of personal data and the risks that are associated with that. So that's just my comment, please.
Cheers. Thank you very much. Simon, can you take that back about, can this committee look at the implementation of AI? Because I think we just corporate risk in respect to that one. So it may be something that we have to take back to see if it's in the remit of the committee. I'm not saying that it shouldn't be, by the way. I'm just saying we need to check it. Thanks.
Yeah, we can absolutely take that back, and we can maybe consider it being a future presentation topic, a little bit like we've just had on 106.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that. Any further comments? If not, I'll just move the recommendation on the agenda packs, and you have to bear with me because there's several recommendations. So regarding recommendation A, we are asked to note the current status of the corporate and strategic risks facing the county council. I will move the recommendations. Do I have a seconder? Thank you very much, Mr. Piper. Is that agreed? Cheers. Thank you. Regarding recommendation B, we are asked to make recommendations on any areas which might benefit from further examinations. And I think we've had one on here regarding AI. Thank you very much for that one. On with regard to recommendation C, can we take the updates on the emerging risks on artificial intelligence and local government reorganisation as being duly noted? Thank you very much. And with regard to recommendation D, we are asked to note the counter fraud updates. All in agreement? Cheers. Thank you very much. We'll now move to item 13, which is the internal audit service progress against 2025-26 internal audit plan and high importance recommendations. This report is also being presented by, presented by Neil.
Thanks again, Chair. So yes, it's a report on update on audit work completed over 6 months of September and the status of high importance recommendations at the end of October, and along with some performance information. So we operate to professional standards, and that requires me to produce a risk-based plan and to support the overall opinion on the council's governance, risk management and internal control. The plan for 25-26 was approved on 31st of March, and the resource allocation is shown in paragraph 3. So the first part of the report refers to the work undertaken, which is listed in Appendix 1. And due to the longer reporting period, we stretch it out from 4 to 6 months. So a significant number of audits are covered off this time. Since the report was compiled, obviously a number of the status of those audits have moved forward, some to include some to completion. Part 2 of the report, paragraphs 11 to 18, outline high importance recommendations. That's where material risk has been identified. Just to give the committee assurance that those remain in the committee's domain until I confirm sufficient action has been taken. We do allow extensions to implementation dates, but only with valid justification from management, and that is reported through to chief officers and to this committee. The detailed recommendations are in Appendix 2. Anything that's in bold indicates it's new or updated. But what paragraph 12 does in the report is to summarise them into new, excuse me, new recommendations, extended out and closed categories. The number of high recommendations has risen due to the extended reporting period, but it is positive that a number of high recommendations have actually been closed off. Paragraphs 13 to 18, just to cover off that 2 of those recommendation areas were in direct payments, both in adults and children's. And whilst the recommendations were accepted on the whole on block by management, unfortunately there's a nationwide issue with prepaid card provider, and that meant the progress has been delayed, but we are monitoring how that's progressing. And then the final part of this report is to provide some information on resources used and the number of audits completed. So reasons are given for the variations on those. That's all I'd like to say on the report. Again, I'll take any questions.
Cheers. Thank you very much, Neil. Members, any questions at all? No, if not, we're asked to note the report at the updates on progress on work undertaken at 30th September 2025 and the implementations of high importance recommendations at 31st of October 2025, the progress against the planned position at 30th of September 2025. So I'm happy to move these recommendations. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you very much, Mr. Balls. All in favour? In agreement. Thank you. Item 14 is draft internal audit charter. Neil, I believe you are also presenting the final item on today's agenda. So back to you.
I am, Chair. Thank you again. Yeah, so this is a specific report on a governance document that's required for the Internal Audit Service. I mentioned earlier, since April 2025, we've been working to new internal audit standards, but they don't change the requirement for us to have an internal audit charter. And the minimum requirements to be within the charter are contained in paragraph 3. There's a new requirement in the standards for a mandate, but for local government, that is simply the Accounts and Audit Regulation. We've always had that as a mandate, and that's been referred to in previous versions of the charter. So to develop the charter that matches the new standards, I've used a template provided by the Chartered Institute of Internal Auditors, and paragraph 5 just explains the key points of change. And finally, as a heads up, I inform the committee that a further internal audit governance document, which is known as a code of practice on the governance of internal audit, will be brought to a further committee. Again, that's all I've got to say. Take any question.
Cheers. Thank you very much, Neil. Members, any questions at all or comments on that one? If not, we're asked to review the revised draft internal audit charter and agree a delegation to the Director of Corporate Resources to make any necessary changes. I'm happy to move this recommendation. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you very much, Mr. Balls. Are we in agreement? Thank you. All agreed. Thank you. So thank you very much for that one. We'll just go to the date of the next meeting, which is on Friday, the 23rd of January, 2026 at 10 a.m. I hope you've had a great meeting. Just wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, because we won't meet until, this committee won't meet until afterwards. As stated before, there are no urgent items, so thank you very much for attending today. All the best. Thank you.